Good morning, everybody. For those that weren't with us last week, I am Trish Dewald. I'm an advisor to COACT, and I am the principal at Mondo Unlimited. I'll be your facilitator for today's training and future trainings. This one is Introduction to Individual Giving. So if you hope to be on a deep dive in economics or something else, you are in the wrong spot. I encourage you to download the handouts that you should have received in advance of this course. We'll also drop them into the chat periodically when it makes sense throughout the course. I also have to say that there are some folks on this session that I know could be sitting shoulder to shoulder with me and teaching me several things. So feel free to take yourself off mute, to share your bits of wisdom in the chat. Lots of fundraising pros on this morning. So thanks for being here. Charnay, you want to share a little bit about COACT?
Sure thing. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. We can move to the next slide, Jackie. Good morning, all. So my name is Charnay Sanders. I serve as the program manager at COACT Detroit. And if anyone is unfamiliar with COACT, I'm seeing several familiar faces and names. So I feel like you all, but just in case, we are a resource hub that accelerates transformative impact with nonprofit and community organizations in Southeast Michigan. While our team primarily works remotely, we do convene leaders within our 6,500 square foot physical space located in Detroit's New Center neighborhood, which is this lovely photo that one of my colleagues, our beloved mayor, Jackie, is right now sharing the screen and picture. And Jackie, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. We carry out this work by creating space for collaborative idea generation, sharing cross-sector resources, and providing equitable access to world-class programming and learning opportunities. I will drop our website link for you all to learn more about COACT and some of our exciting upcoming programs that we have in store. But at this moment, I'm really pleased that you all are part of this session as part of our Fundraising Unpacked COACT and Candid training series. This session is going to focus on Intro to Individual Giving. And again, I'll pass the mic back over to Trish shortly, but I just wanted to mention right now, please, again, if you haven't already, you can rename yourself to include your pronouns and your organization, and you could drop that in the chat as well. And again, if you are able, we definitely encourage you to turn your camera on to make this a personable and exciting interactive experience for our time together. But without further ado, I'm delighted to pass the mic back over to our facilitator, Trish, for this session. Thank you.
Thanks, Charnay. And we'll pop up a few slides, Jackie. That's us. All right, so just a few expectations here. When we're done with this training, everyone should be able to do all the things that are listed up here. But I think it's important at this point to note that this session is a really quick overview and introduction to individual giving. This field, fundraising, nonprofit work, it's quite nuanced. And when we talk about individuals, well, they're all individuals. And so what motivates one person to give to an organization that might look an awful lot like your organization may not motivate somebody else. So as we go through this training, I want you to remember that nuance. I also encourage you to just keep in mind that when we look at how we approach individuals, a dollar donation and $1 million donation from an individual is really meaningful to the person that decided to give that gift to your organization. So while there are individual things that we need to take into consideration, there are definitely some practices that you can incorporate in your fundraising activities to help increase the likelihood of your success. So we'll start unpacking those a little bit today. So on the next slide, we have a few definitions. You should also have received a document that is sort of a glossary of terms. I think it's like 15 pages of fund development terms. But here's some key definitions that I just wanted to call out and highlight. But it's important to remember that your fundraising program is grounded in the plan. It's that guiding tool that you use to keep you on track with your fundraising strategy, with your accountability. Annual giving, I think it's important to note here that that doesn't necessarily mean recurring gifts or gifts that donors are committed to giving every year, but instead, it's a description for an approach. It's how you will solicit and receive funds every single year. These gifts usually come from a direct solicitation to a donor, either via email, mail, face-to-face. Sometimes they could have given indirectly through a web campaign, but these gifts are usually not program specific. Sometimes they are, but the beautiful thing about many annual gifts is that they can be earmarked for general operating funds. There are a couple of other terms not on this slide that you'll hear: prospect, who are you talking to or who do you want to be talking to? Cultivation, how do we share our organization story with funders and potential funders? Solicitation, that's the ask. Stewardship, I think the most fun part of fund development, but that's once we've earned somebody's trust to give an investment, to share their resources. This is how we continue to keep them engaged when we're not asking them for money or to attend an event. So next up, curious to know, drop in the chat, raise your hand, drop an emoji, whatever you're comfortable with. Do you currently have an individual giving program? Who's got them? All right. Lots of folks that have them. Excellent. Yes, but it's not a firm plan. Krista, that is okay. Still building the program, a little rough. I got it. It needs updating. You know what I'm seeing in here is really important feedback, right? Your individual giving plan should never be written, signed, sealed, and put on a shelf, right? It's something that you should always be in the process of updating. Bridget, to use your words, growing, refining, adding to it, because as we learn more about our donors and what motivates them, we can get better and more targeted with our approaches. It is a fluid document. Thank you for those words, Shannon. It absolutely is. So as we think about the sources of support for nonprofits in the United States, you can see that while a lot of times we think about foundations and corporations as the big money in town, they really only make up a modest proportion of charitable giving. The vast majority of private giving comes from individuals, people like us, me, you, everybody that we know, who give to their favorite local nonprofits, medical institutions, schools, houses of worship. So why do you think this is the case? Why is it that people make up the big proportion of giving? Anybody want to share why they think? Easy to reach sometimes, absolutely. Because it's emotion-based, yes. And the simple fact of the matter is there are more people in the world than there are foundations and corporations put together. And that's, part of the reason why individuals are an important part of the funding mix, but they tend to be more loyal over time. We know that our foundations, that's right, Bobby D, you have my notes. Individuals tend to be more loyal. Foundations, corporations, they tend to change their giving requirements and qualifications over the course of time. But individuals, once they love you, and if you can continue to foster their trust and their commitment, it can be a really important source of giving for an organization. An individual might start with giving a small gift, and with the right cultivation and stewardship, those gifts could grow to include larger gifts, or at the end of life, bequests through wills and trusts and estate giving. You might call that planned giving and part of your fund development plan. Also, individuals are easier to approach, right? There's not a set process for asking individuals for money. like there is for most foundations, for most corporations. We'll go back to that river slide, Jackie. For those of you that were here last week, this slide's going to look familiar, but how many of you have heard the phrase diversifying your funding base? And what does it mean? And somebody last week said, it's like the saying, you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. And that's true with fund development, right? We want to put our eggs in many different baskets to protect our different sources. And so think about this river as your organization with all these little streams feeding into the river. And when we implement different fundraising strategies to incorporate individuals, foundation, government, it lessens the possibility of this river drying out if the flow from one of these sources begins to slow down or is suddenly eliminated. So for example, if your organization only receives government support and that government support ends, what happens to your organization? I mean, we don't want to think about that, but we do want to think about it when we're planning our fund development approach. And so just like we saw in the beginning of in that pie chart a few slides ago, foundations are only one current or one stream of revenue. So while these are just a couple of examples of potential funding streams for an organization, every organization will be different, right? So your funding streams will be different. Anybody have any additional possible revenue streams? Where else might your organization receive funding?
From products.
From products, yes. We're seeing that quite a bit more. Earned revenue, events, earned income. Anybody have any luck with crowdfunding? Partnering with a business. I love a third party fundraiser. Creative services. Yeah, I think the key takeaway here is that a strong river means a strong organization. And so the more you diversify these funding sources, the more stable your organization will be. And I also think it's important to note here that within each of these revenue streams to have a diversification. I had the unfortunate position of being a fundraiser in 2008 and an organization that relied very heavily on revenue from the automotive industry. And now, not because I was any sort of fund development genius, but because I didn't really care so much about cars, and my organization had access to really strong relationships in other sectors. We were able to diversify within corporate partnerships, but outside of the automotive industry. And that it could have been and should have been a strategy for the organization to diversify outside of the automotive to include other kinds of corporate support. And because we did that, we made it through that 2008 relatively unscathed. I won't say entirely unscathed. So let's talk a little bit about the psychology of giving. Why do people give? Next slide, Jackie. Why do people give to nonprofits? There's no wrong answers here, but throw out some ideas. Come off mute, pop them in the chat, makes them feel good. Yes. Tax write-offs, sure. Emotional connection, yeah.
To see transformation.
Yes, to see transformation. I love it. All of these are beautiful reasons. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, do you want to know what the number one reason is that people give to organizations? It's because they were asked. I mean, that's not the motivator necessarily. So that's good. You know, if I'm not asked, I might not give. Yeah, go ask everybody. Next slide. So there's a ton of research that shows that for more than 85% back on the, yeah, because they were asked, 85% of donations were given because somebody asked them to. Now, you can't just roll up to a stranger and be like, yo, support my org, right? It's important to know, like a lot of folks said in the previous slides, it's important to understand how donors choose which organizations they support, right? So the answers you gave on the last slide aren't just the key to understanding why, but a big part of how donors decide which nonprofit organizations to support because there are so many to choose from. So most people give to organizations that affirm their important values, compassion for those in need, like somebody said. Donors are more likely to give when they think that their donation will make a difference. But that doesn't mean that organizations that are well-resourced shouldn't ask for funding. Oftentimes, well-resourced organizations that are making a difference, are good with their communication strategy, are also receiving a large percentage of the funding. Donors don't only give from the heart. They take into consideration costs and benefits of giving, the benefits to themselves, like somebody said, like those tax benefits, or that feeling of feeling good, the feeling of looking good to others. For better or for worse, ego can be a very strong motivator, and that's why social proof can be a successful tactic in fundraising. There are few ways to measure what motivates people, either to give or to not give. And I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but people don't typically confess to giving just because someone asked them to. So while all of you are talking about rolling out and asking everybody, you have to really understand the internal triggers, what motivates somebody. So people often say things like they feel bad for people who do not have homes, or it makes them feel good to help others. And so whatever those motivating factors are, instead of guessing, we can ask. I mean, we can simply ask our donors why they give. What motivates you? So on this next slide, I want to put an asterisk on this. Our partner, Candid, they put together these national trainings, and these slides we use, and they utilize this cause selling verbiage. I think it gets to the heart of what we're doing in a lot of ways. But I like to think of our job as fundraisers more like matchmaking rather than selling. But when we think about selling or matchmaking, these two circles here show, some traditional fundraising messaging in the cycle versus the cause selling message cycle. And so when you think about the secret to standing out, it's not really a secret. And it's important to realize that some of the basic principles that business folks use in their messaging also work in the not-for-profit sector. And so having a really well thought out, documented strategy to execute for asking people for money is a really, really worthwhile investment. And so food for thought. Does your organization have a message more like the traditional fundraising message, or do you deploy cause messaging? And I think, this cause selling messaging really comes extracted from our case for support. And that's one of those foundational, those grounding tools that as nonprofit folks we have or should be creating to use as driving forces along with our strategic plan. Your case for support might also look like your case for investment. And so the important things to think about when we're looking at cause selling or matchmaking messaging has to be honest, heartfelt communication. There used to be, I think, a really dangerous, what do you call it when you say it too many times and people just keep doing it, whatever that word is, theory for fund development that our messaging needed to be donor centric. And I don't think that's the case. I think our messaging we need to understand our donors when we're talking to them, but our organization really needs to do a good job at telling the story of why our services are critical, why what we do is important, why it's compelling. And so we do need to consider our donors, but I don't think we need to put the donors at the center of our story. All right, so this matchmaking cycle or cause message cycle has, as you can see here, 8 essential steps. And so regardless of the gift potential, there are pretty predictable things or actions that we need to do that become the steps in the fund development cycle. And so there are three distinct phases here, right? You can see them with the different colors. Phase 1 is all of the work that we have to put into prospect for qualified potential donors. Prospecting, qualified, and potential donors. That's a bunch of fundraising words, but it really means, how do we find folks? Who should we be talking to? Phase 2 is the face-to-face time with those prospective donors. And then phase 3, it's the ask and the stewardship, is everything from the time you ask for the gift through the stewardship and after the gift is given. So on the next slide, we'll look at these a little bit more granularly. We'll unpack them a little bit more. So prospecting, ask the people who are closest to your organization. See who else gives to organizations like yours. When we gather information about these donors, we're looking for things like, and this is before we approach anybody, right? Who knows those individuals? Where do they give their time and resources? Some organizations have the ability to do wealth screens on the folks that have already given in our databases. We get to make the introduction. Oh, and as we're going through this, think about where you get the most energy in this cycle, right? Sometimes fund development professionals think they need to be all of these things at all times. I encourage you to call in your board members, to call in volunteers, see where they fit in this cycle, right? Because it's not, you don't just get to do it once. This is an ongoing, ever-evolving, constantly revolving cycle for engaging and keeping folks close to us. So the discovery phase is really important. That's what we're talking about, is knowing what motivates an individual. So your approach for someone, for example, who just came to an event because their buddy invited them, is going to be totally different from someone who is a graduate from a program or a grateful patient, or lives in the neighborhood and sees the folks that you're serving. It might not surprise anybody to know that I do not have an engineering degree. My undergraduate degree is in communication and my master's is in NGO management. So when I got a piece of mail from Michigan State University, I was invited to support their engineering program, alleging that I was a graduate from that program. I was surprised. I was bummed. I was like frustrated. I'm like, you don't even know me. Why would I give you money if you think I'm an engineer? I didn't give to that appeal. I didn't call them and tell them why I didn't give. Wouldn't it be great if donors did that? But they did recover, right? They eventually straightened out their database. They figured out who I was. They figured out that I am not, in fact, an engineer. And I give occasionally now to my alma mater. Okay, so in this next phase here, right? Once you know donors' passion, we're still back on the other slide. Sorry, Jackie. Once you know your donors' passions, what motivates them, once you've figured out why they're committed to you, then you can tell them stories that matter. And you can do this in person, via mail, via email, on social media, right? You start to understand more about different personas of individuals that give to your organization. You can craft messaging and tactics that really support deepening that emotional engagement with individuals. And so you want to ask or invite these folks to partner with you on your mission, with the mission of your organization. And then circle back, right? This stewardship piece. This is fun, right? You get to share stories of success and impact so that the donors, the investors, are proud of the giving that they helped to do the great work that you're all doing. All right, so the next slide, we talked about this a little bit, but I think it's super important. And again, this cause selling, I just don't love it. I'm gonna pretend it doesn't say that. But it's so important to highlight here, right? Like the discovery is the part of this process, because it allows us to uncover those motivations, the needs of the donor, where they see themselves within your organization, how they prioritize their giving and their investments. And this is a fun time to really get curious, use active listening, ask the right questions. The more we can work on those muscles of active listening skills, not only is it good in personal relationships, but it's really important part of this process, from your pre-ask meeting all the way through the solicitation and the stewardship process. There's a popular colloquialism in our field: you don't ask your way into a gift, You listen your way to a gift. You listen your way into a gift. So this donor pyramid, it's a bit of a crude visual on the next slide. And it's very basic, but I like to share it because it shows how individuals might move from loosely connected, right, through occasionally giving, or they might have popped into an event because somebody, they liked the food or the entertainment, or somebody asked them to come. But I think it's important to remember that everyone starts somewhere, and that every single one of the gifts that we receive is really important. It's important to us, but it's also important to the donor. They make choices all the time of where they spend their time, their money, and their resources. And so it's also important to recognize and sometimes remind our leaders and our board members that we, as donor professionals, have limited resources to invest in moves management. It happens, it's rare, but it happens that a donor will just pop up and be like, yo, here's $10,000. But usually our moves management, and that's probably in the glossary too, but when we get somebody engaged with our organization, what do we need to do to move them through their life cycle with our organization, move them up this pyramid from occasional donors to recurring donors to mid-level donors and major donors? And then how do we incorporate tactics into our mix to get that strong river, right? How do we add revenue streams and strengthen that? And it really only happens with a plan, right? So if we are just out here trying to figure out how to get all event dollars, all the individual dollars, all the major donors, corporate foundation, all of it, we're going to lose sight of how we're progressing. And so I think that fundraising plan, we talked about it a little bit last week. For those of you that weren't on the session, I know that COAC will be making a recording of it available for free on their website. I don't know if it's up yet, but certainly plug into COAC's newsletter to keep an eye on those things. Last week's is. Thank you, Ben. So for those of you that weren't there, I just want to dive just shallowly into what is a fundraising plan. So it'll be a little bit of review, but I think it's okay, right? It's a living, breathing document, and a successful fundraising plan, a good fundraising plan can help us to be proactive rather than reactive to our funding needs. Oftentimes as nonprofits, we experience funding crises, right? We've all been there when we're struggling to meet our programmatic needs, our fundraising goals. You are not alone. When a major donor decides not to come back, corporate donor decides they're not going to give to you, you don't get much warning. The stronger our fundraising plan is, the more solid, the more strong, the stronger our revenue streams will be. And so feel free to chime in, but why is a fundraising plan important? Why do we need this? Why is it critical to have a written plan? Yes. Create a plan to follow. Yeah. Exactly. Movita, it keeps our organization focused, right? Because if we don't have a plan, so everyone is on the same page. Absolutely. It helps everybody, the staff, the board, the volunteers. It gets everybody marching in the same direction towards that big picture, right? We're looking at the same numbers, the same metrics, the same goals. It's not like we show up in January and are like, hey, we're going to raise $4 million. And then in December, we're like, yay, we raised $4 million. The fund development plan is critical to the success of the organization. It also helps our leadership and our volunteers to understand what their role is with the fundraising plan, right? Our board members need to be engaged and aware and involved with how they can help support the team. And also, it's, when we write it down and we look at, 75% of our giving is coming from corporate partnerships, may give us the foresight to look at, okay, how do we start to change that funding mix in this year subsequent years to help us prepare to weather any storm that might come our way. And so while most fundraising plans fall into either a fiscal year or a calendar year, they take months to put together, right? It's not something that just one person should sit down and write in an hour. It's a collaborative process. It'll be the executive director and the board's responsibility to approve the plan, and also the staff and the board's responsibility to implement the plan. And so it's important that as you're socializing the need and the activity of a fundraising plan, that you include folks, and so that planning team consists of the leadership, the program staff, right? You're fundraising to do a thing that the program team or other folks within the organization are executing. It's important that they're included so that you know what changes they may have to their needs for the organization, so that you can be proactively prepared with the funds and the support to help make that happen, whether they're capital investments, new programs, hiring new staff, whatever it is, it all needs to be taken into account. And so a lot of times the fundraising plan becomes an important part of the strategic planning process for an organization. I would caution everybody not to use a fundraising plan as a stand-in for a strategic plan. Oftentimes they get convoluted, but I like to build a fundraising plan on top of the organization's strategic plan. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, but they can go, they really should be operating in tandem. But like everybody said a few slides earlier, your fundraising plan, it's going to go through some edits. There are going to be lots of drafts. You'll have lots of buy-in, and it should change, right? If you set a goal to raise $20,000 from major gifts at the beginning of the year, and by March you've raised $35,000, I don't think that means you stop raising major gifts. You might rethink how you're approaching additional major gifts. You may shift some of your priorities. That may be a pot that gets bigger over time, while your corporate partnerships and corporate investments may get smaller. So it's important to look at it holistically and not in silos. All right, so how does an organization start with a fundraising plan? How do you make one? We'll look at an example on this slide. So this is an example plan strategy. This is very rudimentary, but it has the components that I think are important for you to consider, for all of us to consider when we're making a fundraising plan. And so, if we say we want to raise $10,000 from new donors by June 30th, we have to think about, how are we going to do that? How are those gifts going to come in? I mean, I like to encourage my board members and my organizations to think about it in small bites, right? So if we know that as a rule of thumb, we need to make 3 asks to get 1 gift, that helps us to put together the appropriate size prospect pool and campaigns to achieve these goals. So instead of thinking about one $10,000 objective, think about it in how many $1,000 gifts do we need? How many $500 gifts do we need? How many $20 gifts do we need? And then put together specific strategies and campaigns to help you achieve that. So I think we send it in advance, but I think we're going to drop it into the chat, a link to a sample strategy, a fundraising strategy for your organization. Can we pull that document up? There it is. So this document, I want to drive through it just quickly with you. I think they encourage us to do this together with you because so many organizations have different objectives for their fundraising plans. I'm going to use this time to go through an overview of this worksheet. So the first tab encourages us to assess our current strengths, right? Are we on target with our new donors and individual donors, event participants, annual donors, major donors, or do we need more attention? And that becomes an important dashboard as we work with our volunteers. So we can say, all right, well, I know you want to do another special event this year, but we're already on target with those goals. So we need to put a little bit more attention into our new and occasional donors. And so on the screen now, you can see an example plan. So across the top, you'll see constituency and revenue stream. That's from whom you're going to be asking this money for these investments. What the goal is, this should tie directly back to the organization's budget, what your strategy is, when you want to do it, right? These goals all have to be SMART, specific, measurable. I always forget what the A stands for. Help me out, Mavita. And timely, right? Actionable. So what's the strategy? When are you going to do it by? Who's responsible? It shouldn't look like Trish is responsible for everything, because Trish will fail at 70% of the things if she's responsible for 100% of it. So, and then how will we know when we're successful? What are our measurements of success? And then what are the next steps? This, I want to put another asterisk on this conversation here, right? This worksheet can be a great tool for an organization that doesn't necessarily have an active CRM, customer relationship management platform. Ideally, this information is working directly within your system so that your next steps are automated, that as you complete a step, as you make your way through this, you can track in real time. Multiple spreadsheets can get unwieldy and onerous to keep up with, but for organizations that are just starting in the fund development process, absolutely use an Excel spreadsheet, a Google sheet, whatever it is to get your thoughts in order and to keep track of them. And you'll see on the third tab there, it's just all the information's taken out, so that as you go back to your desks after this learning, sit down with some of your colleagues, you can start to fill this in with some different constituency and revenue streams in practice. All right. Here's a pop quiz. How many active nonprofits are there in the United States? I guess I should put a caveat that my data is as of 2021. A lot. It's true. It's true. They're close to 2 million nonprofit organizations. And I think it's important to know that, one, to highlight the importance of the sector. The work that we do is so important. The nonprofit sector is the third largest economic driver in our nation. But it's also important to know that we are one of many organizations competing, not with each other, but competing for the attention of our donors. And so we have to do our due diligence to plan and to execute, and to think about it from the heart, right? What is it that's going to motivate our donors, our individuals that might be in our circle to support an organization like ours? And so that was rapid fire indoctrination into our Fundraising Unpacked second session about individual donors. Some of the feedback from the first session was that folks had hoped for more time to engage with questions and one another at the end. So I intentionally left a bit more time here to share, to answer any questions, to see if there's anything that we can dive into a little bit more deeply. And so I'd love to open up the floor, either via chat or take yourself off mute and let me know what else we can share.
Hi, Tricia and everyone. Mavita Burris here, Avalon Healing Center. And my question, you mentioned early on about like wealth management tools and growth tools. And in a nonprofit, when you're not familiar with how that works or what to do, how would you suggest we as smaller nonprofits, how should we approach cultivating new donors with a tool like that? Or in our instance, looking for donors who have like passion?
Yeah, so that's, thank you for the question, Mavita. And, it's not a cop out when I say it depends, but it always depends, right? And so, a couple of things that are true when we're looking at what we can learn from our database and from who already gives to our organizations. If you use a database like Razor's Edge or Salesforce, there are plugins that you can use, and your salesperson for those tools, whatever CRM you might use, will be able to help you. Sometimes they'll do a free well screen on a handful of your donors that you have in your database, but there are paid resources, and it usually freaks people out when I share this with them if they haven't heard it before, but there is a whole lot of information that lots of folks know about you based on what you're doing all day, every day. And the credit reporting agencies are some of the #1 partners for nonprofit organizations. And so when you do a wealth screen of donors, you can pull all kinds of information, and not me as a human, right? There's a whole team of data nerds and dorks that figure it out from what you're doing with your credit cards, where you're spending your time. And so when you do a wealth screen on your database, you'll usually get back appended information to your database that will include fields like, how frequently does this donor give to my organization? And if you don't have Salesforce or Blackbaud or a big database like this, you can still look at your donor information and figure out some of this. It's going to take a little bit more energy and effort on your part, but we're looking for clues like, how frequently do they give to my organization? What are the sizes of the gifts that they give to my organization? Did they give more last year than they did this year? Did they give less? Right? And so we start to learn different things about our donors, and then we can approach them based on that information, right? So if I gave $100 to an organization last year and I gave $50 to the organization the year before, how much should you ask me for this year? No less than $100. A lot of organizations will get into the habit of spending out a year-end appeal. Look at all the great stuff we did this year. You're so important to us. Look at Sally, her life's changed because of you. Please give me $25. You might get $25, but if you're asking somebody who gave you $100 last year for $25, you're leaving $75 on the table. And so, Mavita, your question is an important one. It's a good one. The answer is super nuanced. But I would say, the shortest answer is use the information that you have. If you can get more information, get it and utilize it smartly. And I have to say smartly because, and I'm going to share something with you guys. Oh, it's super embarrassing. I don't care. One time, my strategy, and I'm using air quotes intentionally because it's not a strategy that I suggest you deploy, but it's one that I think we find ourselves deploying when we don't have the benefit of good planning, which I didn't take the time to do, or good additional resources, which I didn't feel like I had. And so my strategy was write a letter. If it makes me cry, send it to everybody in my database and hope they send me back some money. And, it kind of worked until one year I was using that little mail merge wizard guy, the little happy paperclip that would pop up and be like, hey, is this what you meant here? I sent a letter to everybody and addressed it to Dear Mary. Bobby said, Dear Mary. Angela said, Dear Mary. Matt said, Dear Mary. And I started getting phone calls like, you don't even know my name. Not good. Not great. Now, we get to eat a lot of humble pie. And this is going to happen. All of us are going to experience it. We're going to get a new job as a new fund development person in a new organization and try to figure out, what did somebody do last year? And sometimes there's great information. Oftentimes there's not great information. And so you might ask somebody for $1,500 If they gave you $15 last year, they might be offended. If they gave you $150,000 last year, they might be offended. And I don't share that to scare you or dissuade you from doing anything. Don't let that stop you. But it's important to be equipped with the words that feel like, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to, whatever you did. I know you're not Mary, but let me tell you a story about Mary who lives in my shelter and why your gift's so important, no matter what I call you. Right?
Yeah.
Think with their
Thank you. That helps because a lot of times, you know, when you're small, it's 2 or 3 people doing the work. It's like, okay, how do I engage with 1,000 people or 2,000 people appropriately? And I agree with you, you know, looking at those gifts, what did they give? Look at it over time. And I'm new to this organization, looking at it over time and saying, what did they give last year? And how can we move them up a little bit appropriately every year with that compelling story and actually getting to know them through
Yes.
their gifts? Thank you.
And I think, you know, when we're looking at individual donor campaigns, we can't think about our individuals as monoliths, right? We are all fund development professionals. I don't do it the same way you do it, right? And you shouldn't do it the same way I do it. But we all have our different quirks and strategies that work and don't work. And the same thing on the receiving end with our donors. You know, I think it's important to remember not just to talk to our donors when we want something from them. So while you might not be able to sit down with everyone all the time, it's important to make time and space to connect with them. And so with my fund development teams, I like to set outreach goals. What 5 people did you call this week that you didn't talk to yet this year? You don't need to ask them for money. You don't need to ask them for anything. You might just call them to say thank you. You might just call them to say, hey, I read this article. I remember you came to the event and you learned about blah, blah, blah. Here's another article that supports that, right? How can you add value to the relationship with your donors and potential donors that helps draw them closer to your organization and sees you as an expert in partnership and solving for whatever challenge it is that you're solving for?
I have a question.
Yes, Dr. Julia.
Hey, Trish. Good morning, everybody.
Hi.
So you sent out a glossary of terms for our handout. And so there were, I think it was 2 terms that I wanted to understand how they complement each other, connect to each other. The terms were appreciated real property and security gifts, real estate or securities. And then the other one was bargain sale, bargain price.
Right. So I don't know. And I don't mean to be flippant about that in my response. Those 2 both fit within the tax advising world and real estate investment. So I think whenever somebody calls and says, hey, grandma died, I want to donate her house to you, don't say yes straight away, because there's a whole lot up in that conversation. There is an amazing resource in our community through MCR, Michigan Community Resources. They provide pro bono legal advice for organizations. And I think both of those terms that you were asking about, Dr. Julia, I think fall into legal stuff that I don't know and would ask somebody smarter than me about. Hope that doesn't feel like a cop out.
No, we're being honest and transparent. We're all here to learn and be, you know, who we are. So thank you, Trish, for attempting to do that. For everybody else, just look at your glossary. That gives some definition too. Because I've always wanted to understand how nonprofits are able to buy a house for $1 and then be able to go on to redevelopment and then turn it into their headquarters or their base to build out. So when I saw these terms, I was like, oh, so this is what it's called, right? Or how it relates to it. So thank you, Trish, and thanks everyone.
Thanks for bringing it up.
And Trish, it looks like we have two questions from Sharnice in the chat. Like the first one, I've heard the term strategy friend raiser. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yes. I got feels about it. I mean, our job really is to connect with people, right? And so when we're telling our stories about our organizations, we're looking to bring people closer to us, right? We imagine them like friends. And so organizations will oftentimes have events or activities with the sole purpose of bringing people closer to their organization. And it can be a really successful strategy for brand new organizations and for all organizations, right? We want folks to hear about what it is we're doing. Um, Depending on how well resourced your organization is, would help me to understand where I would prioritize hosting a fundraiser. They can get really expensive, they can become really time consuming if they get going in the wrong direction too quickly. And so it's sort of like a do it, don't do it mentality, right? You got to figure out your go, no goes on things like this. But at the core of the concept of a fundraiser is if you have 6 people that already give to your organization or already connected to your organization, how can those 6 people help you to each bring 10 more people to your organization? And so a fundraiser coupled with a fundraiser can be a really great strategy for increasing the number of folks that are connected to your organization. And so looking at who's sitting around your table already, who's connected, and inviting them to help bring their friends, their contacts, their connections closer to your organization is the core of the fundraising concept. Was there a second part to that, Sharnae, that I missed?
Nope. Now it's just a second question. What are some of the biggest no-nos when going to foundations, individuals, corporations for funding?
Not knowing anything about them is one. And I would love to invite my colleagues, folks that have experienced no-nos, to also share in the chat. I think another no-no is something that sounds really crude, but it's really an accurate description, is spraying and praying, right? Just send as many letters to as many foundations as you possibly can and pray that somebody's going to respond. It's important that we treat our corporations, our foundations, our individuals as if they were individuals with individual objectives, individual motivations. And it can be really detrimental, really hurtful to your fund development strategy if you're just like, yo, who do we like to talk about a lot? Dan Gilbert, you're a rich guy. Here, give money to my organization because you're a rich guy. That's not going to work, right? But how can you better understand what motivates the Gilbert Family Foundation to give? Where are their priorities? Does your organization resemble some of those? And then have a conversation with somebody, because look, nobody's trying to waste your time either. It takes a lot of energy to submit a proposal, to put together a request, to send a letter of interest or intent. And oftentimes a conversation with a program officer at a foundation or somebody who works at a corporation can help save you time and help to direct your efforts a little bit better, right? Maybe you're exactly in their sweet spot. Giddy up. What else am I missing? There's something in the chat. Not knowing their funding priorities.
Yeah, and Trish, I want to add to that as well. When you no, I've often encountered with younger or newer fundraisers is talking more than listening.
Yes.
This is what we do. This is why we do it, and going a mile a minute and have not given them an opportunity to digest what you're saying, or even listening for alignment. Because sometimes when you're speaking about what you're doing, you're passionate, you're excited, you're doing your elevator pitch, and they're talking about a garden and you're talking about electrical.
Right.
And you have a garden, but you're focused on, I got to get the electrical done. No, talk about electricity for the garden, you know? So aligning their passion with, and I've seen it with a lot of people who just want to get in the room, get their pitch, and miss the mark and had a beautiful idea, but they were not listening.
Yeah. I think another no-no, and this is important, you don't have to take money from everybody. That is really hard to do, but there are going to be some donors that do not align with your organization. There are going to be some funders that expect too much in return from you. It might, and I'm thinking, there were some federal grants that I turned into swear words, right? Like it might have had 2 commas in that gift, but it took me 2.5 commas worth of money and staff and time and resources to report on that gift. So you don't have to take money from everybody or every organization. Similarly, every idea for a fundraiser is not a good one. So imagine yourself sitting around, imagine everyone sitting around a board meeting, a board table, and board chair says, what would be really fun is a roller skating party, and everybody will come, and we should invite Eminem and Madonna because they're Detroiters and they're rich people and they're going to give a lot of money, and I love to roller skate, so it'll be fun. My question to board chair is, would you like to lead that effort? Do you have the energy, the resources, and the time to dedicate to doing that thing that I already know is whack, but will help get some clues? Perhaps roller skating is the next big thing in fund development, and maybe Madonna and Eminem are going to show up and Oprah's going to give away her favorite things, but probably not. It's okay to invite other folks to think about how they're going to get it done. What else? I'm just so grateful that folks will come here and listen to me talk about fundraising. I love it. I love the work that you do. I love your hearts for this work. Some of you I've had some close conversations with. Some of you are strangers to me, but I'm grateful to you for your hearts, for your work, for your commitment, and for being just a little bit crazy enough to do this work.